So, okay, let's start here. The video games, as a social phenomenon, they form such a large platform of material that can be explored through different methods, directions, and I think this definitely makes them an interesting subject of study for philosophers who can thus engage in a lot broader interdisciplinary field of study. So this field is perhaps still somewhat under-researched in Slovenia, but I definitely see an opportunity for the development of interdisciplinary research of game studies. So as for the study of the past in digital games, I cannot provide you today with a list of historical games or game studies that have been studied in Slovenia. I have not yet found any Slovenian research dealing with specific historical games. However, there have been some bachelor and master theses written that at least partially dealt with the history of video games, but mostly only in a general sense, and they were not specifically related to our region. So there were also few that I could find that mentioned or were focused on a specific video game or genre, but there were no games among them that could be defined as historical games. There were some video games developed in Slovenia that I would like to present in this presentation. And as you will see, they were developed mainly in the 1990s and the early 2000s, but there doesn't seem to be any organized exhibition or an established archive or a museum collection in the country. And some of these games are also, I must say, quite difficult to find and run because mainly, they're pretty old. There also doesn't seem to be a broader use of historical games in education, either in museum or in schools, which I find very unfortunate because I think they have a huge potential. What I think it's important here to know is the development of video games in Slovenia started late, and this is mainly due to piracy. So you see, Yugoslavia didn't allow import of home computers in the 80s, but some people smuggled them into the country anyway, especially 8-bit home computers, ZX Spectrum and Commodore. So Radio Student, this means radio student, broadcasted pirated games that people recorded on tape and loaded onto their home computers in order to run. So let me just mention the first Slovenian game. Just show it to you. This is the only thing that I could find, but my plan is to kind of run it at some point. So it was called Contraband, meaning illegal goods, which was developed in 1984 and ran on the ZX Spectrum. It is described as a text adventure game in which you smuggle TVs, computers. What does that tell about us, and tape recorders into Yugoslavia? So somehow it seems that there was quite a bit of interest among gamers of the time to play a scenario that mimicked their real lives by building their own computer out of the smuggled parts they played the game on in the first place. So the game was quite popular and was also commented on extensively and even played in a contest where the winner took home a new Spectrum and the runner-up a case of beer. So to give you an overview of the development of historical games, video games in Slovenia, I must first mention the video game developer called Arxel Tribe. Oh, we don't need sound. Okay. Which was founded by two Slovenian architects. So the company started producing games in 1996, and in collaboration with the French publisher Cyro, they developed a series of historical games or games based at least in part on a particular historical era. These games are found on forums as a part of a debate about their strange, enigmatic, unusual, out-of-the-box genre, in which players discussed among themselves under the topic titled "What the WTF is this?" Which was meant at least in a strangely flattering way. And during my research, I came to share this opinion because some of these games are as fascinating as they are puzzling. So one of the most popular games developed by Arxel Tribe was The Ring, The Legend of the Nibelungen. It is structured as a point-and-click adventure game based on Richard Wagner's epic 4-opera cycle, The Ring of the Nibelung, but in a futuristic space setting. It is described as an interactive science fiction opera adventure. Accompanied by epic orchestral music, the game tells the story of Ish, who is sent on a mission from some kind of space station to explore and solve the mystery of the ring and save mankind after Earth is destroyed. However, the main plot being that humanity can be renewed precisely through the legend of the ring, as the story is supposed to be deeply embedded in our DNA as a masterpiece of human creativity. So if this sounds a bit confusing, I must say that this is just a small taste of the entire gameplay. So the entire game can be described as a story within a story, which at times makes little sense and leaves the player confused and also bewildered. You play as Ish, who investigates the story through 4 other characters, who you in turn immerse yourself in as the player and play through each sequence to gain the knowledge, but collectively as Ish. So all the happenings, events, dialogues, etc., are accompanied by loud orchestral music by Wagner that you cannot turn off in the settings, which sometimes make the game feel like a very intense and surreal or somehow psychotic dream or hallucination. So the voice acting kind of does the rest. I can just tell you to write this in YouTube and watch a bit of it if interested. So one of the players whose gameplay I found made a statement that I think sums this up nicely when he says at the end of his playthrough, he felt like he had seen something he should not have. Despite its chaotic nature, the game had a charisma and an obvious magnetism, as it was quite popular for the time. It sold 700,000 copies, and the company even developed a sequel, The Ring 2, Twilight of the Gods, which was released in 2002 and is similar to the original, but a bit chaotic in its own way. So I will continue with Paulo Coelho's trilogy, released by Arxel Tribe in 1997, 2000, and 2001. All 3 games, you're going to see it in a sec. So they're called Pilgrim, Fate as a Weapon, The Legend of the Prophet and the Assassin, and The Secrets of Alamut. So they're first-person point-and-click adventure games set in the early 13th century and described as a commercial, cultural, heritage games, as well as graphic interactive fictions. So in Pilgrim, you play as a monk in southern France a year before the start of the Albigensian Crusade, with a mission to deliver a Coptic manuscript brought back from the Crusades by a Templar. So in the sequels, you play a former Knight Templar and Crusader named Isaïf. So Arxel Tribe also developed the game Pompeii in 2000, described as an adventure puzzle game. It was developed in collaboration with the French museum organization, RMN, as it was intended to be historically accurate as possible and educational for the player. So the main plot revolves around the love story between the Scottish cartographer, Adrian Blake, and Sophia, and is played from Adrian's point of view. So he's cursed by the goddess Ishtar, who sends him back to Pompeii, to be exact, like 5 days before the eruption of Vesuvius, to find Sophia, who has no memory of him, and convince her to leave Pompeii before the catastrophe happens. So the game's sequel is Jerusalem, the Three Roads to the Holy Land, released 2 years later. And sorry, the title here is wrong. So this is Jerusalem. It's another historical adventure game for learning the history of the city, again endorsed by the RMN. The plot again revolves around Adrian Blake in search of his fiancée Sophia, who has mysteriously disappeared. He travels back to Jerusalem in 1552 to find her. So another Arxel Tribe video game worth mentioning here is Mistmare, an action role-playing game released in 2003. In a sort of alternative Middle Ages, you play as a monk who must resolve the mystery of a deadly fog that is haunting Europe, stop its spread, and restore order in a collapsing world. It's funny kind of because it's set in the year of 1996. So with the idea behind the Industrial Revolution never happened. So this is supposed to, this is what medieval Europe then was supposed to look like. So another Slovenian developer, Zootfly, appeared in 2002. And it's worth mentioning here the release of Panzer Elite Action Fields of Glory. It was released in 2007. It's a realistic World War II warfare tank simulator, which can be played either in single or multiplayer mode. So another successful creation that it's only very loosely related to history, but still worth mentioning, I think. It's a single-player action adventure game, Marlowe Briggs and the Mask of Death, co-developed by Microsoft and released in 2013. So Marlowe Briggs, described literally as a non-nonsense hero, is resurrected by a Mayan spirit that lives in a mask of death and becomes a very angry immortal warrior who goes on a mission to rescue his girlfriend, who has been kidnapped by bad guys. And lastly, here we have Tritirnian, an independent Slovenian game developer that released Mordhau in 2019. Partly as a result of a successful Kickstarter campaign in 2017 that managed to raise more than $300,000 in less than 24 hours. So many times compared to Chivalry, Medieval Warfare, Mordhau is one of the most successful Slovenian video games in recent times, selling 1 million copies just 1 month after its first release. So historically set in the Middle Ages, it has been described as a first or third person multiplayer hack and slash combat video game. The combat system attempts to approximate historical medieval combat techniques, where the player can control weapons, shields, and footwork. The game also features ranged weapons, siege engines, and mounted combat. It has been praised for its historically realistic environment, historical accuracy of medieval weapons, realistic melee combat, general combat mechanics, and customization options. So one controversy that should be mentioned here concerns the dilemma that Mordhau's game developers, or at least their community of players, faced, is between supposed historical accuracy and the issue of inclusion in the game, namely the inclusion of women and people of color, especially as Mordhau prided itself with its customability. The Triturnian team said it wanted to leave the decision up to the players, which was taken to mean that there was a plan to include a toggle that would allow a player to hide the ethnicity or gender of other players if, for example, one was uncomfortable with the sight of, for example, a woman on the medieval battlefield. So later, Traternian denied those claims, of course, but the controversy was still inflamed, mainly due to the fact that many players still describe the Mordhau community as a very toxic environment, both in the free messaging service, which some players started turning off during the game, or on its forums. So this being said, female characters were finally added to the game this year, but there are still no options to play as a non-white character, which seems to remain problematic. I conclude my presentation by saying that I hope I have been able to provide you with at least some material on the development of video games and video game studies in Slovenia, and that historical game studies and game studies in general currently represent a merely discovered potential, although, as you can see, there is much material for study. Thank you.